"She isn't needed by anyone," my husband said about his 8-year-old daughter. "Just send her back," my family snapped. "She's a burden." I didn't send her back. I took action. 10 years later, their faces went pale when they saw her step up to the microphone and thank me first. Not her father. Not the grandparents who suddenly remembered how to smile for photos. Me. And the funny thing is, I didn't do anything heroic that night. I didn't leap onto a stage or deliver a speech that made the room cry. I just sat there in a navy dress I bought on sale and tried not to smudge my mascara. Because 10 years ago, when that same little girl showed up at my front door with a suitcase and a face full of fight, I made a decision that didn't look impressive in the moment. It looked like paperwork. It looked like late-night homework battles. It looked like holding a kid through a panic attack in a pediatric cardiology waiting room while strangers stared at me like I'd personally invented childhood trauma. It looked like staying. After the ceremony, I went back to my hotel room and stood in front of the bathroom mirror, peeling off makeup with a cotton pad like I was wiping the day away. The lights above the sink were harsh. They always are in hotels. It's like they're designed to help you confront your choices. My cheeks were flushed. My eyes were tired. But for the first time in a long time, my shoulders felt light. Outside the bathroom, I could hear the muffled chaos of a busy venue even on a quiet floor. Someone laughing in the hallway, a door closing, a distant elevator ding. Stephanie, was in the main room texting her workshop mentor, probably asking if that one sentence on stage had just started a war she didn't mean to start. Steph had been 8 when Mark dropped her in my hallway. Tonight she was 18, 10 years later exactly. On stage, she'd been calm, collected. The kind of young woman you assume had 2 stable parents, a golden retriever, and a childhood full of piano recitals. It's a convincing performance. But I know the truth. I know that when she was 8, she slept with her suitcase half-packed under the bed. Not because she was organized, because she didn't believe she was allowed to stay anywhere. Tonight, she accepted a National Young Writers Award, nothing Hollywood glitter famous, but real. The kind of award that turns talented kid into book deal meeting, that changes the way people treat your name. The auditorium was full. The host told jokes. The photographer barked, "One more! Hold it!" And when Steph walked up, I saw my family sitting together in the second row like they were entitled to front seats in the story of her life. My mother was there, wearing that expression she saves for judging lawns and weddings. I approve, but only because I'm generous. My mother-in-law clutched her purse like it was a shield, and Mark, my ex-husband, sat between them, polished and comfortable, like a man who thought he'd aged into innocence. They leaned forward when Steph's name was announced, as if she'd been winning awards for them this whole time. Then Steph started her speech. She thanked her editor, her mentors, the workshop director who'd pushed her, the librarian who'd slipped her extra books and never made her feel strange for wanting more. And then she paused. Not the dramatic pause that's meant to land well. A real pause, the kind that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. My mom, Kate, saved my life, she said. And in that half-second of stillness before the applause exploded, I watched 3 faces do the exact same thing, in perfect unison. Blank, then pale, then tight. Because Steph didn't say stepmom, she didn't say Mark's wife, she didn't say the woman who happened to be there. She said my mom. And the people who'd called her a burden had to sit there in public while strangers applauded the woman they once tried to shame into giving her away. I didn't look at them afterward. I didn't need to. I wasn't always the woman who could outlast chaos. I used to be normal, or at least normal-ish. I met Mark in my 20s. I was teaching elementary school and pretending I wasn't terrified of adulthood. The kind of terrified you hide behind lesson plans and grocery lists. Mark had this quiet charm. Nothing loud, nothing flashy. He listened. He made you feel like your words mattered, which is a dangerous skill in a man if you ask me. He told me early on he'd been married before, 19, a rushed marriage after a pregnancy, 2 kids trying to be adults and failing in real time. There was a kid, he said, shrugging like it was a minor plot point. A girl. His ex, Jessica, had made the divorce miserable. According to him, she blocked him, moved, kept the kid from him. He talked like he'd been wronged by a system, not like he'd been absent by choice. He paid child support, court-ordered, automatic withholding from his paycheck. He said that part like it proved he was a good man, and I believed him, because I wanted to, because Mark felt like stability. We got married, bought a modest house, mortgage, yard, the whole American starter pack. We both worked at first, me teaching, him working long shifts as an engineer at the local power plant, until I got pregnant and my dream arrived right on time. Pete came first, then Freddie not long after, like he hated the idea of being left out. The boys were bright and curious, and the kind strangers call easy, like it's luck. Pete learned to read early. Freddie talked like a tiny professor. I quit teaching and stayed home. Mark worked more. It was the usual trade. I told myself it was temporary just until the kids were older. And for a while, I didn't think about the child from Mark's first marriage at all. Neither did he. And that should have told me everything. One afternoon, Mark came home early, too early, and I made the mistake of feeling relieved. I thought maybe he'd take the boys outside. Maybe I'd get 10 minutes of quiet. Maybe I'd drink coffee while it was still hot, like a woman who had her life together. I opened the door and saw a suitcase. Mark walked in holding the hand of a thin little girl with tense shoulders and eyes like broken glass. She was about 8, small for her age, sharp in a way that didn't feel like confidence. It felt like defense. "This is Steph," Mark said. Then, like he was introducing a new blender, he added, "My daughter." My brain stalled. Completely. Like a computer trying to open a file it wasn't built for. Mark kept talking because silence makes some men itchy. "Jess called me at lunch," he said. "Told me to meet her by the gate. Said she's done. Said, I did 8 years, now it's your turn. Fair is fair." He made a face like he'd been inconvenienced by a bad return policy. "She's in Los Angeles now," he added. "Chasing some guy." Steph's fingers tightened around the suitcase handle. Mark didn't notice. Or he noticed and didn't care. "My mom's in Sarasota," he continued, "helping my sister. She had twins, so Steph's here. For now." For now is what people say when they don't have a plan, but want you to pretend they do. Steph yanked her hand away from Mark and stood in my hallway like she was ready to bolt. I crouched slightly, teacher voice sliding on automatically. "Hi, Steph. I'm Kate." She stared at me like I'd asked her to donate a kidney. Mark chuckled and said, "Her mom's a cuckoo. Just flew the nest." Steph's eyes flashed. Pain, not anger. The kind of pain that turns into rage when it has nowhere else to go. I pulled Mark aside later and said quietly, "Don't insult her mother in front of her." Mark shrugged. "She abandoned her. It's true." "It's still her mother," I said. Mark looked at me like I was being dramatic. That was my first clue that I was about to be alone in this. We shoved a third bed into the boys' room, bought a small desk, a cheap bookshelf. I did what I always did when life hit hard. I organized. I enrolled Steph in our local public elementary school. Mark signed the paperwork because, in America, love doesn't get you access to a child's medical records. Legal authority does. At first, Steph was quiet. She watched us, measured us, like a cat deciding whether you're safe. Then she got comfortable, and comfort looked like war. She talked back to every request like it was an insult. Wash your hands. Why? Because you were outside. So? She snapped at Pete and Freddie like they were bugs. They tried to win her over because little boys believe love is something you can hand people like a toy. Pete offered her his favorite truck. Freddie brought her crackers. Steph responded by taking the truck and losing it, then calling Freddie gross when he cried. The first time I saw her shove Pete hard enough to make him stumble, I stepped in fast. "Steph, no!" She stared at me, eyes narrowed. "He's annoying. He's 4. So there was no softness, no guilt, just defiance. Then things started breaking. A cup here, a plate there, a toy cracked in half, a phone dropped accidentally. At first I thought she was clumsy. Then I caught her. She lifted a vase off the shelf, looked at it, and dropped it. Not a slip, not a mistake. A choice. The vase shattered across the hardwood. Steph gasped theatrically and said, "Oops," like she was auditioning for innocence. I stood there with a paper towel in my hand, staring at glass on my floor, and it hit me. This wasn't clumsiness. This was a test. Kids who expect to be thrown away push first. It's safer to be rejected on your terms than to be abandoned without warning. So she pushed, and the house shook. The emails started within weeks. Refusing to complete work. Disruptive behavior. Argumentative. Then the grades came in, and I felt my stomach drop. Steph wasn't just behind, she was missing the foundation. Reading was a struggle. Writing a paragraph looked like torture. Math was a minefield. She counted on her fingers with this tense focus that made me want to scream at the adults who'd let her get this far without help. I sat with her every evening at the kitchen table. I tried to teach the way I taught my students, calm, steady, patient. Steph fought me like learning was humiliation. Every correction turned into a battle. Every worksheet became a standoff. After an hour, I'd be exhausted. Steph would smirk like she'd won, and the work would still be undone. Then the health issues surfaced. She needed glasses. Not dramatic, but enough that she'd been squinting for who knows how long. She had a nervous tic that showed up when she was stressed, an eye blink, a shoulder twitch. Subtle, but constant once you noticed it. And at a routine pediatric visit, the doctor paused with the stethoscope and said, "I'd like a cardiology consult." Nothing panicked, nothing dramatic, just serious. So I added specialists to my calendar, pediatrician, optometrist, pediatric cardiologist, more waiting rooms, more forms, more insurance calls, more people glancing at me like I was the reason this child looked like she was carrying the weight of the world. In America, people love the phrase, "it takes a village." They don't mention the village mostly shows up to stare. Mark wasn't much help. He worked late, weekends, double shifts. When he was home, he wanted quiet. He wanted peace. He wanted the kind of family life that exists in commercials. Steph listened to Mark more than she listened to me. One look from him could shut her down. But Mark rarely used that look, because that would require effort. Mostly, he handed her back to me like a bag he didn't want to carry. "You're home," he'd say. "You deal with it." When I tried to talk, really talk, about how bad things were getting, Mark shut it down. "What are you complaining about?" he snapped. "You don't work. We're not hurting for money. You're a teacher. If anyone should know how to handle kids, it's you." Then the criticism started. The house wasn't clean enough. The kids were too loud. Dinner wasn't ready at the right time. And eventually, because it always gets personal, he criticized my body. "You've gained weight," he said one night, like he was reading a label. I stared at myself in the mirror later, turning sideways, squinting, and thought, I've gained responsibility. I've gained stress. I've gained a whole child. But sure, let's talk about my genes. Meanwhile, my mother began hinting that we should send Steph back. My mother-in-law suggested it with less gentleness. "Put her on a plane to Jess," she snapped. "Or send her to Sarasota. I'm here right now. Or there are programs." Programs. That polite word adults use when they mean we want her out of sight. Steph was always listening. She started sleeping with her suitcase half packed under the bed, and that broke something in me I didn't know could break. Mark came home early again one day, and I made the mistake of feeling relieved. I thought he'd take the boys outside. I thought I'd get 10 minutes of silence. Instead, he stood in the kitchen like he was announcing the weather and said, "I'm leaving." No build-up, no apology, no sadness, just an exit line. Then he told me about Ashley. He'd been seeing her for a long time. Long enough to buy her a condo. Long enough to involve his grandmother, sweet woman, trusting, who helped with money because she thought Mark was securing something for the family. Mark put the condo in Ashley's name so it wouldn't be counted in the divorce. He told me this like he expected applause for being clever. He tossed out a consolation prize. "I'm not going to fight you for the house," he said. "You can keep it. For the boys." Then he sighed like the conversation was exhausting him. "Only problem is Steph." There it was. The child reduced to a problem. Mark rubbed his forehead. "Jess doesn't want her," he said. "My mom can't take her right now. Ashley's young, no experience with kids. And Steph? She's hard." He looked at me like the solution should be obvious. "She isn't needed by anyone," he said, voice flat. "So just send her back. To Jess. Or wherever. Why are we all pretending this is normal?" My stomach dropped. And then I saw her. Steph stood in the hallway, frozen, eyes wide. She'd heard everything. She didn't slam a door. She didn't scream. She walked toward me like she didn't trust her legs, and then she grabbed my waist and sobbed into my shirt like I was the last solid thing in the world. "Kate," she choked. "Please, don't send me back. Please. I'll be good. I'll do anything. I want to stay." Her whole body shook. Mark and I stared at each other over her head, both of us stunned because this wasn't the bad kid everyone complained about. This was a terrified child who understood she was being traded like an unwanted item. I ran my hand over her hair, felt the bones of her shoulders under my palm, and something hard clicked into place inside me. This wasn't about whether she was difficult. This was about whether I could live with myself if I abandoned her too. I looked at Mark. "She's staying," I said. My mother heard and snapped into the phone, furious. "Just send her back. She's a burden." My mother-in-law said it too, in her own flavor. "You're ruining your life," she warned. "You have your own kids." I could have folded. I had every excuse in the world. Single mom, 2 small boys, a mortgage, a divorce, a child with health concerns, and a history of neglect. I could have looked at Steph and said, "I'm sorry." Instead, I held her tighter and told Mark calmly, "A kid isn't a soccer ball. You don't kick her back and forth when she's inconvenient." Mark didn't argue. He just left. People love dramatic action, the kind with yelling and door slamming and revenge that fits inside a 2-minute clip. That's not what I did. I did the unglamorous kind. I met with a family law attorney. I filed for divorce. And because I learned fast that love without legal authority is just stress, I pushed for what Steph actually needed: stability. Mark signed what he had to sign: the temporary guardianship order and medical power of attorney paperwork, because otherwise I couldn't even schedule cardiology follow-ups without being treated like a stranger. We got the guardianship order in writing. Steph lived with me full-time under that order. The boys did too. Mark had visitation on paper. In real life, he took Pete and Freddie every so often for a few hours, mostly for optics. Steph? He kept her at a distance like she was a reminder of his own failure. Child support came through the system the way it does when the court gets involved. Automatic, consistent, no dramatic envelope handoffs. Jess called twice a year. Birthday. Christmas. Sometimes a gift arrived. Generic. Like she was shopping for a coworker's kid. Steph stopped expecting more, which is a very quiet kind of heartbreak. And little by little, the chaos stopped being daily. Not because life got easier, because we got steadier. After the day she begged me not to send her away, Steph changed. Not overnight. Not magically. But the wall between us cracked. She stopped breaking things. She stopped hitting the boys. She started hovering near me in the kitchen, watching how I cooked, how I cleaned, how I handled stress, like she was studying the rules of staying. Then she began doing small things without being asked, wiping the table, folding towels, boiling pasta because she heard me sigh too loudly and didn't know what else to do. She'd take Pete and Freddie outside and run them around the yard until they collapsed, giving me 10 minutes of silence like it was a gift. Pete and Freddie, little boys with big hearts, forgave her faster than any adult ever would. They started calling her Sissy, like she'd never frightened them. Steph pretended not to care, but I saw the way her eyes softened when Freddie fell asleep on her shoulder. I went back to work part-time, tutoring evenings, rebuilding what Mark's departure fractured. Steph became my right hand. She watched the boys while I worked. She learned to make lunches. She helped with homework. And one day, without me asking, she started helping me help them, sitting with Pete while he struggled through math, quizzing Freddie on spelling words. It wasn't perfect. We still had bad days. She still had panic in her body sometimes, like it lived in her bones. But we were building something, a home that didn't evaporate when adults got bored. One afternoon, I had a rare moment to myself. The house was quiet. The boys were out. The laundry was, miraculously, under control. I sat in an armchair with a worn paperback I'd kept since college. Steph wandered in, sweat on her forehead from running around outside with the boys. She grabbed a snack, then dropped onto the couch and stared at the book in my hands. "What are you reading?" she asked. "It's about a man who makes a terrible choice," I said, "and spends the rest of the story paying for it." She stared at me like that sounded delicious. "Read it." "It's heavy," I warned. "I don't care." So I read a chapter. Steph listened like she was starving. When I finished, she exhaled slowly and said, "That was insane." Then softer, "Can I try?" From that point on, books became her oxygen. She devoured everything. Classics, modern novels, poetry she pretended she hated and then quoted back at me later. She argued with me about characters the way adults argue about politics. She laughed at dark humor like she'd been born with it. And for the first time, I saw who she might have been if she'd been raised with care from the beginning. A bright kid. A sensitive kid. A kid who felt everything too hard and needed words to hold it. One day she handed me a thick notebook like it was contraband. "Don't laugh," she said, hovering in the doorway. I opened it. Stories. Uneven, awkward in places, absolutely written by someone still learning how to control her own thoughts. But under the mess, There was something real. A voice. I looked up. "Steph, this is good." Her shoulders dropped like she'd been holding them up for years. I took the notebook to her English teacher, hoping for a writing club, a mentor, anything. The teacher flipped through a few pages, smiled politely, and said, "This is cute. Kids write stuff like this all the time. They usually lose interest once they realize writing takes work." I walked out of that school with a smile so tight it could have held a cracked plate together. In the car, I sat for a minute, hands on the steering wheel, and thought, fine. If the system shrugs, I'll build something else. At home, I told Steph, "Your teacher loved it. She said the school writing club isn't your level." "Yes," I lied, but it was the kind of lie that protects a child's courage instead of crushing it. Then I called a local youth writing program run through a library and a community arts center, workshops, mentors, small groups of kids who carried notebooks like lifelines. I walked in with Steph's stories. They read them. And unlike the teacher, they didn't pat her on the head. They took her seriously. They invited her in. Steph lit up in a way I still can't fully describe, like someone finally said, "You're not too much. You're just something." Within a year, she had pieces published in small local outlets, then anthologies, then contests. By high school, she was winning statewide awards. By college, English and literature, her first real book deal happened. She worked part-time through it all because she hated asking for anything. When she handed me money and said, "For the house," I took it, thanked her, and quietly put it into a savings account I'd opened for her. Because if anyone deserved a safety net, it was the kid who'd grown up without one. That award night was the 10-year mark. What came next unfolded later, over years, slowly at first, then all at once. Jess came back when Steph started getting attention. Los Angeles hadn't given her the life she wanted. The relationship didn't last. The dream got expensive. And suddenly, Jess remembered she had a daughter. She showed up with open arms and dramatic emotion, like she could hug 10 years away. Steph was polite, never cruel, never rude, but she kept her distance like it was instinct. Mark tried too, in his own way, awkward texts, stiff compliments, occasional invitations that sounded more like obligations. Steph didn't scream at him. She didn't punish him with drama. She just didn't reach for him. And I understood that. Because when you grow up begging not to be sent away, you don't waste energy begging adults to be different. You build your own foundation. Steph's foundation was me, Pete, and Freddie. Pete grew into a focused, ambitious kid who eventually became an architect. The kind of man who shows love through reliability. He called me every Sunday, like clockwork. Freddie grew into a brilliant, intense kid who became a surgeon. He worked insane hours and still showed up to family dinners because he understood what showing up meant. And Steph became a writer whose work traveled farther than our little city ever had. Her books got translated. Her name started showing up in places I never imagined. And the first big thing she bought wasn't a flashy car. It was a small cottage by a lake. Because years ago, back when the kids were little and I was exhausted, I once sighed and said, "Someday I just want to live by water." Steph remembered. She bought the neighboring house for her own family too. 2 cozy homes behind one shared fence. Garden, a little pool for the grandkids. One afternoon she said quietly, "I want my children to have a grandma like you." I stared at my hands because looking at her made my throat tight. "You see what kids could be," she said, "and you don't throw them away when they're hard." I didn't answer right away, because what do you say to that? "Thanks for not being thrown away" is not a sentence anyone should have to mean. But Steph meant it, and so did I. That's why tonight, in front of the hotel mirror, wiping off makeup after another award ceremony, I felt something close to peace. Because I remember the version of this story that almost happened. The version where I listened. The version where I sent her back. The version where an 8-year-old girl learned, permanently, that adults only keep you when you're easy. Instead, I took action. Not loud action. Not dramatic action. Paperwork. Doctor visits. Parent-teacher conferences. Late-night talks. A steady home and a locked-in routine. The boring, relentless kind of love that changes a life. Now, the same people who once suggested shipping her off love to say they knew she had potential. People's memories get flexible when success is involved. Mine doesn't. Mine still remembers a thin girl in my hallway with a suitcase and eyes like broken glass, and the way she clung to me when her father said she wasn't needed. I'm grateful, still, that I didn't let anyone convince me she was a burden, because she wasn't. She was a child, and she deserved a home. Appreciate you being here. If you enjoyed this, please like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Drop a comment with your thoughts, because I read them all. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon with another story.